Beech Ridge Motor Speedway. This small 1/3 mile track, buried away in the woods of Scarborough, Maine, is a small slice of short track heaven. While this track may still be a Maine gem, and it holds a special place in my heart, today we will explore the track that is now abandoned. I've seen and loved these forms of videos made by Slapshoes and Black Flags Matter, and wanted to make this as a love letter to the track that molded my love of stock car racing. The big draw of short track motorsports is the heats, the qualifying races, and the different ways that these raceways figure out how to make something like a couple of 100-lap races build up and be super exciting. These different chapters of the race allow you to watch to see which driver you should be looking out for during the main feature. I've always liked the Road Runners, or the smaller compact cars like Ford Focuses and Chevy Cavaliers. Cheaper vehicles with cheaper payouts for race wins, but a lot more fun racing, pushing these cars to their limits. These races seem to allow the everyman to become a NASCAR driver, even if it's only for one night. Beech Ridge opened up for the first time in 1949. The same year, NASCAR recorded its first season, and 4 years after the end of the Second World War. Only a year later, Scarborough Downs, a horse racing facility, would be open to the public down the street. It's crazy to think that a track that brought me so much joy is one that was built when my grandfather was just a child. The track was built and owned by an airplane mechanic and sawmill operator, Jim McConnell. At this time, Scarborough was up and coming. Nowadays, Scarborough is filled with a lot of Keeping Up with the Joneses type. Amazon had been looking at the newly defunct Scarborough Downs as a spot to build one of their shipping centers, and condos have been popping up everywhere. Like anywhere in Maine, though, if you know where to look, you can still find the old-fashioned people who live here. The original track that Jim built was clay, allowing for sliding, bumping, banging, and all forms of good old-fashioned short-track racing. Beech Ridge had a unique design with a lack of walls in each turn, leading to plenty of cars, instead of piling up on the track, spin off into the dirt, sometimes out of the view of the spectators. The entrance to the pit is on the exit of turn 2, with a break in the wall.
Where these barrels are and everything. That's actually
and then right before turn 3, there's another to bring the cars back out onto the track. And an X pattern in the infield grass where emergency equipment and tow trucks used to sit. Overlooking the backstretch, there was a nice green area with fencing where spectators could stand. This was originally just a mound to block views of the pits, but it became commonplace for people to stand on this berm. There were grandstands on the front stretch that could hold a few hundred spectators, with a second set of smaller metal bleachers added later. The 3rd-mile track would put on some spectacular races. I've been told where I live here in Gorham, which is a town away from the track, you used to be able to hear the cars all the way in town. That's epic. It's like living next to a baseball stadium. Throughout the years of racing, certain people emerged as pros of this small oval, with names like Dick Berggren frequenting this track. But no one was better than the 12-time Beech Ridge champion, Ralph Cusack. Cusack was at Beech Ridge when it opened, and decided after attending to jump in and race his beautiful Blue Deuce. As I stated before, he had figured this track out in a way others hadn't. 12 championships is not some fluke or something you stumble into. Like Jimmy Johnson, Dale Earnhardt, and the King Richard Petty, you don't get a championship total like that without hard work. Fun fact, only 2 drivers in Beech Ridge history have ever won multiple championships in one season. And one of them, Dick Walsenhume, did it twice. Walsenhume took both the A-Class and B-Class championships in 1966 and 1974. He stood atop the super modified and late model classes. The other driver to pull the double is Homer Drew, who won the A-Class and B-Class championship in 1968. In 1980, Ralph Cusack was able to make the transition from dominant race car driver to track owner. In the first few years of Cusack's ownership of Beech Ridge Motor Speedway, he made no large changes, running the track basically the way it had been run for years. Although, without Cusack, the Beech Ridge I know and love would never have existed. In 1985, Cusack decided to pave the racing surface, a move that motivated NASCAR to look at the track as a possible affiliate. In 1995, NASCAR sanctioned the track, and the NASCAR Busch North Series and the Featherweight Modified Series began making visits to the track. This opened the door to see a lot of professional athletes from all around frequenting the track, in stock cars and modifieds, and guys like Dave Dion became pros at this track, picking up 5 wins over the years, with Dion bagging 2 wins in 1990. Since this video is about Beech Ridge and my inspiration for stock cars, I feel like it would only be fitting to include my father. I can remember watching NASCAR races very young, and I can guarantee you I'm not the one who put them on the TV. I always heard stories here and there, little tidbits about Beech Ridge and the things that my father saw while he was growing up, but I figured getting it straight from his mouth would be a lot more fitting. So, enjoy some choice questions. Alright, we are officially live.
We're going live.
Do it live. Yeah, what age did you start attending races?
Pretty much my whole life. There's always been some sort of association, like an uncle that might have raced, or someone like my mother's, one of my stepfathers raced, or a neighbor raced, or then of course all the kids in high school, their dads, or they did. So pretty much my entire life.
When you started going, what type of cars were at the track? What was the track like back then, and how did it morph throughout the time you were attending? And then what was your favorite series?
Well, when I was a kid, obviously it was back when there were still bombers, and they had sprint cars, old style modifieds, late models, and limiteds. As I became a teenager, it was just pretty much modifieds, late models, limiteds, and then sprints would visit. Modifieds have always been my favorite series. Unfortunately, in 1991, there was a driver who was killed, and they took that series away from the track. Basically, what they needed to be was they needed to be people who were more trained on how to run them.
Gotcha.
The actual person who died was not the driver of the car. The mechanic had decided to take the car out for hot laps during the break. He was the one who died, not the driver. I think they just determined that the cars needed to be by people who were more skilled.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they still run at Oxford, which I think is like a half-mile flat or something like that.
So they're going to be running here today at Lee.
Yes.
And did you have a favorite driver or multiple? Or?
Always multiple. There were a ton of them that, Homer Drew, and Larry Tangway, Larry Lasky, Bobby Randall, Jeff Stevens, of course Doug Whitehouse.
Mm-hmm.
Can't miss Doug Whitehouse in '59. But there were a ton. Racing today is the same for me as it was back then. There's always the heel. There's always the couple that you don't care for.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, as long as it's a good race, you walk away happy.
Mm-hmm.
As long as it's not Kyle Busch.
Did they have a Kyle Busch at the track, or someone that was akin to that?
Every series did. Late models, there was a guy, and he was a great race car driver. But a guy by the name of Rick Zemlin. He would come and he won every time. Anytime you saw his car, you knew he was going to be the class of the field. He always felt, he's cheap. But he was a good race car driver.
Did he race a lot, like at a lot of different speedways?
He was an open driver, yes. So He would drive in the different series. And he had, the thing that was suspicious, if you looked at his car, some nights it would be different because he actually had a Beech Ridge car and an open car. And they looked very similar, but they were just a little bit different. So one night you might see his picture in the book, it would be one way, and then the next time it was just a little bit different because he was running the other car.
Is that a controversial take? Do you think he's going to find us?
I don't think so.
And then do you have any personal memories of Ralph Cusack? Was he still racing when
you were a
Like I
kid?
said, the only thing that I can remember is Ralph Cusack. In the 80s, they had built a car that was a two-seater.
Yep.
And Ralph would go out and drive someone, a guest or whoever, and I don't know how you'd be able to get into that car, but he would drive them around in actual race. Typically, he would be at the back of the pack, but there were some times where he was actually competitive. But Ralph's kids were running the place when I was a teenager.
Yep.
So it was Glenn Cusack. Glenn was actually driving. He drove the number 2.
Yep,
And then
just like
there
his dad.
Yes, and then there was Andy Cusack that actually ran the operation.
Was most of your time spent in the grandstands, or did you spend time in the pits? Did you work with teams?
So I worked with teams. Obviously, I spent most of my teenage years working with Doug Whitehouse, but only at the garage during the week. I rode in the back of the truck to the track with the car on the trailer in the back. They would drop me off at the stands, and then they would go and race. And then after, they would come back and get me. Or I would walk over to the pit entrance and wait. Typically, after the main event, the pit gates would be open, and then you could go in.
Yeah.
But you had to be 16 to go in the pits.
Yep.
But by the time I turned 16, I kind of wanted to be in the grandstands more than in the pits.
Yep.
Typically, the pits are not set up for you to be able to actually watch the race very well. At that time, the way the lights were, you couldn't really see the cars very well from the pits. So
it was probably all lighted for everyone sitting in the stands.
Exactly.
So you can't see the numbers or anything on the other end.
Maybe that's changed now at certain tracks, but back then, and then because at that point, by then you've got friends, and so most of the time was in the grandstands for me.
Because a lot of times you'll see, like in the mid 80s, when ACT was running there and all the different divisions when they run during the day, you'll see people standing on that grassy berm that used to block your view of the pits, and you'd see a lot of people standing there.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
watching the race from there, and even people standing in the infield back then. But those were probably safety personnel, more than likely.
Yep.
Last one is, what was your most fond memory of the track? Or multiple, if you have many.
There's multiple, right? But
of course.
I do remember, as a kid, my mom bringing us all, and I remember when we first started. Well, my first earliest memories are, us younger two we'd go in our pajamas. We'd have a pillow. We were little kids. That's But I think I've told the story before. But I always loved we'd have lemonade, Fritos. It was a good time. But I mean, there's a lot, right? I mean, obviously being involved with people who raced was fun because you had a connection.
Yep.
In I think it was 1982, I actually won the fan award, so I was able to ride around in the pace car.
Oh wow!
I got a trophy, a T-shirt, and I got to meet my favorite driver, who was Bobby Babb at the time. He drove the number 14 late model. So
yeah, very cool.
That was fun.
Yeah. You feel like you've suffered any hearing damage being there so young?
Huh?
Very funny.
No, I've always been really good at wearing ear protection. I think to be honest with you, I think I've probably been around worse things since then as an adult, shooting guns and stuff like that.
True.
So, no, I think we always were pretty good about protecting our ears.
All right.
To the outside, the number 21 is Dave Lamprett. 88 is Andy Field. To the outside of him, the number 68 is Rusty Shaw.
I'll be honest before I go too far into my own personal stories. I don't have the same kind of connection to Beech Ridge Motor Speedway my father or the people I see on Facebook talking about it do. But I still really do value this track as a part of motorsports history and as a part of my own interest in not just NASCAR but motorsports in general. I have a few memories of my own to share of the track from back in the day when I was a kid. Back then, I was obsessed with NASCAR. This was around the era of the car of tomorrow. I remember I used to draw the cars all day, every day, and I loved to build a career mode in NASCAR Heat 2003. Only to struggle, quit, and pick up a quick play race as Dale Earnhardt driving the number 3 Jeans machine. I had every team's car drawn and hanging in my bedroom, and I would recreate the paint scheme of cool-looking cars week to week, something I still like to do to this day, actually. One day, I remember my dad taking us to the racetrack. I don't really remember how old I was, but I definitely remember that night in particular. Nothing jumps out in particular, but it definitely made me love the track and made me want to keep going. Around this time, New Hampshire Motor Speedway still had 2 dates, and I can remember every year we'd say, we're gonna go, we're gonna go. We're gonna go to a NASCAR Cup race this year, which is actually a bucket list item that I finally checked off this year, me and my dad. The next Beech Ridge story I remember came from a time when my uncle took me and my cousins to an event at Beech Ridge they used to hold called Day of Destruction. Not a dig at my uncle, but this was not really my cup of tea. It was an event similar to a demolition derby of sorts, with street cars bumping and banging, doing flip contests, and all around not really acting like the cup cars I love to watch on TV. I still have a fond but hazy memory of that night. Things like the track mascot, whose name I believe was Speedy, driving around on a four-wheeler. I don't know, I must have been between 12 and 14 at the time, so give me a break. My most fond memory was my dad taking me and my brothers around 2009, the year before I went into high school, to Beech Ridge. I remember this race because it's really where my love for short track racing really picked up. I loved the qualifying, the heat races, watching the coordination of putting multiple shows on all at once, and keeping the audience involved with all of it. I also believe that this was the night that one of my younger brothers left his PSP plugged into the cigarette lighter in my dad's Jeep, and we had to call my uncle to come jumpstart us. During my time in high school, as I grew up, I moved away from NASCAR. These were the dark days. This was when every race was being dominated by Hendrick and JGR. Jimmy Johnson won 7 championships very close to each other, and NASCAR was failing to find formats and tracks that kept viewers' attention. I would dabble with NASCAR around this time, paying attention to drivers like Kyle Larson of the 42 car and watching certain races. I would tell myself from time to time I needed to go to Beech Ridge more, I needed to watch more NASCAR racing, I needed to watch more racing in person, but honestly, these are the times of your life when you're trying to put it together. You're trying to make money and you're trying to just live day to day. Then when I finally did buy a home, COVID struck and things like sports went on lockdown. Until one day I got news that honestly struck me to my core. After the 2021 season, Beech Ridge announced it would close down, with a slight possibility of races to come in the future. Unfortunately, Beech Ridge was sold by the Cusack family in 2021. While this move was not very popular, this was a time where motorsports were not being frequented as much. Even the Cup Series was struggling to gain and maintain fans. In February 2021, unfortunately we lost the legend Ralph Cusack at the age of 88. His son was still operating as CEO of the Speedway. The Speedway was sold to a land developer, but after some time the land was listed again for sale. Unfortunately, they may not have taken into account that back in the day, to keep the dirt from flying up, making spectating and driving impossible, dirt tracks like these would spray oil or some other substance down. I wouldn't be surprised if it makes the current water supply contaminated and hard to convince anybody to live here. Airbase Speedway, a track that Slapshoes found a few years back, suffered from vegetation refusing to grow, where a calcium compound was spread on the track to keep dust down. My hope is that a group like the one of Dale Earnhardt Jr. and the track owner of North Wilkesboro, whom brought the track back to life, could do the same with something like Beech Ridge Motor Speedway. I lose hope year by year as the track sits there with no maintenance to the racing surface or to the grandstands. While I'm sad that Beech Ridge is gone, I hope this shows everyone that your small hometown track could just disappear tomorrow. I kick myself. I live 15 minutes away from this track. If this track ever were to start back up, I will guarantee you I would be a season ticket holder until either me or the track went belly up again. I need to drive over an hour every time I wish to see a race, which is fine, but it's just not very convenient. My parents and I are going to Lee Speedway in New Hampshire this weekend, and you can bet your ass we are going to be yelling our guts out, supporting another small home track, hoping we can save some of these small tracks for the youngins of the future. If you're in Maine visiting, Lee Speedway and Star Speedway, both in New Hampshire, and Wiscasset and Oxford Motor Speedway in Maine, are all tracks to check out and support. Motorsports are so enjoyable. I highly recommend supporting your local tracks for some good, clean, homegrown fun. And I just want to say at the end here, this is an emotional video for me to make. So many memories, including the spark that ignited my love for motorsports, live here in the soil of Beech Ridge. After the race we went to in New Hampshire, I bought tickets for next year's race immediately. And we're exploring going to Oxford Motor Speedway and Star Speedway in New Hampshire as well. On top of that, I'm playing around with the prospect of visiting every NASCAR Cup Series track within the next few years, just to try to get the whole experience of stock car racing. A series like SRX also scratches the itch, and I think you really should check out this series as well. The cool thing about SRX is it highlights a lot of these smaller tracks that you may never have heard of. I appreciate the support of anyone who supports this video. It was a work of love for the track that inspired my love of motorsports. Oh, and congratulations, Chris Buescher!
Back-to-back, he'll win in Michigan.
Anything else you want to say? Any other tidbits you want to drop?
Yeah, bring back Beech Ridge.
Yeah, I agree, 100%.